On November 18th, 1978, 918 individuals successfully participated in a mass suicide run by a group leader named Jim Jones in Jonestown, Guyana. This was called the Revolutionary Suicide of the People's Temple and is likely the most well known cult in popular media. But how could someone be so successful in leading so many people in a mass suicide like this, in a movement like this? A simple way of thinking of it is it's very easy to be manipulated when you're in a vulnerable position. Or as Layton in 2006 put it, they were under high amounts of stress when they were recruited. There are a lot of ways cults like this can trick dozens or even hundreds of people into performing and participating in heinous acts such as these and others. I'm here to explain the most popular aspects of cult recruitment by highlighting cultist history, breaking down the psychological tricks of cult recruitment, and diffusing any untruths and myths about cults. The general history of cults and their practices will provide valuable insight into their success and recruitment tactics. They begin by kind of asking you to do them favors. This is a very simplified way of putting it, but to be completely frank, if I were asked you to pass me that pen, you would most likely say yes. It's a very simple and polite thing to do. I need a pen. You have one next to you and you're closer to it. It would be easier for you to just pass it to me so I could use your pen. Simple, right? It's little favors like that that stack up where you are finding yourself always saying yes to this person who's charming, who's even sometimes attractive, who's sociable, who's welcoming. You keep saying yes, and then eventually your mind gets a little bit programmed by their program to make you say yes all the time, thus incorporating it into a hive mind type situation. The tactics taken by cult recruiters and leaders are both accessible, meaning easy to learn, and stepwise in motion, meaning easy to follow. Because they're easy to learn and easy to follow, basically every single member in a cult can and will try to recruit a new cult member. This means that the growth, if one person recruits two new people, would be exponential, which is the ideal for people in these groups, keep in mind. Cult recruitment is also designed to teach the process of cult recruitment. It's in the curriculum. In the Lionel Hampton School of Music, for example, the school that I attend, it is very, very much a common expectation that once you learn how to play an instrument or perform a certain way or theorize about music in a particular setting, you are expected to be able to know how to teach that in the same way. Cult recruitment is no different. Once you are recruited and it is understood how your role influences the greater of the group, it is then expected that you know how to recruit people, that you are trained in this. In the latter half of cult recruitment, it's actually a lot of norms introductions, such as this is how I recruit people and why it's important. While keeping these cults in mind, like the Jonestown cult aforementioned, let's now take a deep dive into the psychology of cult recruitment and the steps that they take, the individual ones. Knowing about how psychologically speaking, cult recruitment targets the most vulnerable parts of someone's insecurities and social fears, like love bombing or overwhelming the victims with flattery and seduction, as a study showed by Siguenza in very recently in 2021. It's very important to remember this because a lot of the times people not in cults will actually do this as well. It is a very common tactic in manipulation, very specifically emotional manipulation, as well as overwhelming someone in a sense. Not their senses per se, but overwhelming their comfort, their social abilities. This disorientates them. Everyone has insecurities, and psychologically speaking, the more insecure someone is, the easier target they are for cult recruitment. It's easier to break you down. It's easier to convince you something's very, very true when you aren't very sure of it yourself. If you are an incredibly agreeable person, for example, and you do say yes to handing the pen over to your classmate who, lo and behold, is a part of the cult, you are now a much larger target than you initially were. If you're very not agreeable, if you're wary from strangers, and you make that very clear by creating physical distance and social distance, it's a lot harder for a cult recruiter to even want to approach you or participate in conversing with you. And by making these more vulnerable targets or victims feel special in an overwhelming way, their sense of self becomes warped and is now a shared perspective of self with the person recruiting and themselves. But more importantly, it actually distracts them and has them lose focus, so much so that their better judgment kind of leaves. It just leaves. Once you're flattered enough, if someone keeps flattering you, if someone keeps treating you like this perfect person put on this pedestal, you don't start thinking critically, especially if you're in an insecure, vulnerable position. If you had just lost a partner in a tragic car accident, for example, you're much more susceptible to someone throwing compliments at you or constantly talking about how well you dress or how talented you are or how funny and effortless you make it seem to be funny, that is. It's so flattering and so overwhelming, you don't know what to do with yourself other than agree, especially being in such a vulnerable position. These dirty tactics may make cult leaders sound like diabolical villains, but often the case is very different. And it's important to know what is and isn't true about cults as a result. Yes, they're not good people, but it doesn't seem that way. The main truths and untruths of cults kind of revolve around that idea. A lot of people will just instantly assume that a cult looks like this group of murderous and hooded constituents begged on the, well, I would say more bent on murdering innocents and then themselves and committing crimes. Although there are likely some groups that participate in similar things and may even wear hoods as a religious kind of connotation that they're together, that is usually not the case. It's usually just someone who looks very normal. In fact, I believe it would be more likely to see a lot of them in sweater vests and normal attire that you would see anyone using to keep themselves warm on campus or to make them feel comfortable in the summer. They're just wearing clothes. They're just people. Really warped perspective having people, but still people. Often people in cults are actually very kind and alluring and sociable and welcoming and charming and, like I mentioned, even attractive. If you're into that, they will find a lot of ways to make themselves seem more appealing to you. And sometimes that's because they're a part of a cult and want to recruit you, and other times they're just a charming, alluring person. There are important distinctions between the two, however. If you find yourself spending all of your time with this person, or they encourage you to do so and leave loved ones, that's a huge, huge red flag. You should never have to sacrifice important people in your life who already love you for anyone else. That's not a necessary step to make friends, no matter what they tell you. If you find yourself being depressed or upset or anxious when you're not around this person, also a huge red flag. Codependency becomes very, very, very apparent when you are experiencing more negative emotions than you have become accustomed to, separate from aforementioned cult recruiter. Another thing, cult recruiters don't walk around saying, join my cult, look at my cult, it is amazing. That doesn't happen. They don't call it a cult, which should be obvious. But it's not always obvious. When someone approaches you and they want you to join their group, say a Bible reading, at the end of every week. Every Sunday, you meet at your local church and go through your Bible. It's a very normal presenting thing. But as I mentioned, it's until there are more unhealthy habits and you start sacrificing important things in your life for this person where it becomes unhealthy and big red flags. Now, that's a lot of information, but there's an easy way to wrap everything up. The People's Temple is just one example of these dangerous groups that can and have led to the death of hundreds of innocent individuals. The most popular aspects of cult recruitment can be understood by highlighting cultist history when we try our best to understand why it's alluring and why people do it. They truly believe in what they're saying, what they're talking about, what their goal is, and they want to share it with you and a lot of other people in scary ways. Breaking down the psychological tricks of cult recruitment is also very important, because if you can recognize the steps that they take, then it is a lot easier for you to step away from them. And once you truly understand what is and isn't true about cults, especially by filtering media and the myths that they create, you have a lot more tools and a lot more preparation for if someone approaches you with this kind of ideology in the first place. It's also important to recognize your own faults, and when you are feeling vulnerable and insecure, that's the time you need to reach out to the loved ones that are already in your life. Yes, making new friends is always awesome, and cults aren't something you encounter every single day. But if you have experienced a great loss and are feeling alone in any way or for any reason, insecure or unsure of yourself, reach out to those who already love you. Reach out to a professional, and be wary of people trying to take advantage of you, because sometimes they can tell you're in a vulnerable position and you're an easy target. None of us would think that we would fall for these tactics, but don't be too sure. As Greiser put it in 2019, the human need for comfort and reliability is extremely prevalent in us. It's called affiliated motivation, and it's a huge part of what makes joining a cult just so desirable. Everyone is guilty of wanting to belong somewhere, and in these cases, that comes at the expense of their life. So take caution, make friends wisely, and never let someone borrow your pen.